January 23, 1945. Kummersdorf Weapons Testing Facility, Germany. Major Ernst Hoffman adjusted his optical rangefinder and watched the captured American tank roll across the frozen testing ground at 15 miles per hour. His breath formed clouds in the observation bunker as he tracked the Sherman's movement through Zeiss binoculars. The M4A3E8 Sherman, serial number USA 3084921, looked unremarkable enough. Standard welded hull, familiar 76mm gun, wider tracks than earlier models. Nothing the Wehrmacht hadn't faced before across France's winter battlefields. The Americans called this variant Easy 8 for its 8 experimental designation. German intelligence described it as another incremental improvement to the endless flood of American medium tanks. For 11 years, Hoffman had perfected German tank gunnery doctrine: move to prepared positions, halt completely to eliminate movement variables, calculate, range precisely using Carl Zeiss optics, squeeze off the shot when perfectly still. Superior German optics and gunner training meant first shot kills at ranges exceeding 1,000 meters, or so every tactical manual insisted. But when the American tank commander, a captured lieutenant named Robert Hayes, fired the main gun while the Sherman bounced across ruts at 15 miles per hour, something was wrong. The shell struck a stationary target at 800 meters, dead center, not a near miss, perfect precision while moving at speed. Hoffman checked his stopwatch. The Sherman executed a hard turn without slowing, the hull pitching violently. Hayes fired again without stopping. Another hit. In that moment, Hoffman realized the terrifying truth. They weren't just fighting tanks with better logistics or greater numbers. They were fighting tanks that could shoot accurately while moving, while German tanks had to stop completely. The captured Sherman held the secret to why Panzer crews kept dying in engagements they should have won. Superior German armor, guns, and optics couldn't explain the casualties. Yet German tanks burned while American Shermans dominated battlefields. If you're enjoying this deep dive into the story, hit the subscribe button and let us know in the comments from where in the world you are watching from today. The transport convoy arrived at Kummersdorf at 0630 hours. Major Ernst Hoffman checked his pocket watch. 20 years of Wehrmacht service had taught him that precision revealed truths ideology preferred to hide. At 41, Hoffman represented the professional class that built the Panzerwaffe into what should have been the world's most formidable armoured force. The M4A3E8 Sherman sat on its trailer, battle-scarred yet intact. Frozen Ardennes mud still caked its wide tracks, horizontal volute spring suspension, Hoffman noted. The Americans called it HVSS. But something about the turret installation caught his attention. Hauptmann Klaus Richter stood beside the trailer smoking methodically. The radio expert who'd discovered American communication superiority months earlier studied the Sherman with wary respect. "They're calling it Easy 8, Richter said quietly. Because of the 8 designation, Hoffman catalogued details systematically. The 76mm M1 gun protruded from a welded turret. The bore evacuator suggested combat lessons rapidly implemented, American pragmatism through iterative improvement. 20 minutes later, the prisoner transport arrived. First Lieutenant Robert Hayes emerged with careful dignity. At 24, Hayes had the lean build of a Midwestern farm boy and the steady gaze of someone accustomed to pressure decisions. Despite 6 weeks in German custody after Bastogne, his posture remained straight. Oberst Hans Weber stepped forward with measured authority. The Tiger commander had learned to respect enemy capabilities. He has been cooperative regarding mechanical information. Weber's tone conveyed that cooperation had limits both sides recognized. Hayes's gaze immediately found his former tank among the collection of vehicles on the testing ground, and Hoffman observed the subtle tightening around the young American's eyes. Not grief, exactly, though the emotional attachment was clearly present. Something closer to professional concern for equipment he'd relied upon for survival through months of combat, equipment that had kept him alive through circumstances where many of his comrades had died. That emotional connection to machinery was quintessentially American in ways German military culture found difficult to comprehend. Tanks were tools, not companions, weapons to be maintained and employed with professional competence, not friends to be mourned when lost. "Lieutenant, you commanded this vehicle?" Hoffman asked in careful English, his accent thick with German phonetics but comprehensible to native speakers willing to make modest interpretive effort. He'd learned English before the war, during a technical exchange program with British Armour Forces in 1937, back when such exchanges were still possible between professional militaries before politics rendered cooperation impossible. "Yes, sir," Hayes replied, his tone neutral but not subservient in ways that suggested American social equality assumptions even in military hierarchies. "Tank Commander, 3rd Platoon, Company B, 37th Tank Battalion, 4th Armoured Division." The specificity was deliberate rather than careless disclosure. Hayes was providing unit identification that German intelligence already knew from documents captured during Bastogne fighting. Information that wouldn't compromise American tactical security, while establishing his credentials as someone who thoroughly understood his tank's capabilities through extensive combat experience rather than just technical training. Hoffman gestured toward the Sherman's turret, where the main gun sat at a slight depression angle that suggested the hydraulic system was currently unpowered and the gun's weight was resting on mechanical stops rather than being actively controlled. "The fire control system. This is standard for American medium tanks." The question was carefully phrased to solicit technical information rather than tactical doctrine, staying within boundaries that professional courtesy would allow Hayes to answer without compromising operational security. Hayes hesitated briefly, calculating mentally how much technical information crossed the invisible but very real line from machinery description into tactics revelation, a calculation that every prisoner had to make when interrogators asked questions that seemed innocuous but might reveal information that could kill American soldiers. But Hoffman's question focused specifically on equipment standardization rather than employment doctrine, remaining within boundaries professional soldiers understood instinctively. Technical capabilities were acceptable discussion topics. Tactical procedures were not. "Standard for the M4A3E8 variant, sir," Hayes replied after that brief calculation, his response carefully framed to acknowledge the question without expanding into areas that would violate his obligations. "Every Easy 8 in the European theatre has the same gunnery setup. Standardized production from Detroit Arsenal. The 76mm gun, the improved suspension, and the fire control system are factory standard on this variant. Every tank." The phrase hit Hoffman with unexpected force, and he felt the first flutter of professional unease that would grow into comprehensive dismay over the coming hours. German doctrine typically equipped panzer companies with varying gunnery systems based on tank commander rank, experience level, and unit position. Command tanks received superior optical equipment. Ordinary tanks received adequate equipment. The assumption was that superior soldiers deserved superior equipment, while ordinary soldiers got ordinary equipment. Hierarchical resource allocation that reflected German social structure even in military organization. But if every American tank could engage targets with equal capability, if standardization meant every Sherman crew had identical equipment regardless of the commander's rank or experience, then American industrial democracy was defeating German technical aristocracy through systematic equality. No weak links, no capability gaps, every tank equally capable. The philosophical implications were as troubling as the tactical ones. American social equality assumptions were manifesting as military advantages that German hierarchical culture couldn't match. "Shall we examine the turret interior?" Weber suggested, his curiosity clearly piqued by possibilities he was beginning to imagine. Tactical implications that his combat experience was connecting to battlefield observations that German doctrine couldn't adequately explain. Why did American tanks seem to engage faster than German tactical timelines predicted? Why did American units adapt more quickly to changing battlefield conditions? Perhaps the answers lay in technical capabilities German analysis had missed or dismissed. The ascent into the Sherman struck Hoffman immediately as both cramped and efficiently organized in ways that revealed fundamentally different design philosophies. American designers had prioritized functionality over comfort, creating a workspace that skilled operators could navigate instinctively, even under combat stress, without requiring the kind of precise movement that German design emphasized. Everything was within reach. Nothing required perfect positioning to access. The layout assumed competent users rather than expert operators, another manifestation of American democratic assumptions about soldier capability. German tank interiors were designed for efficiency defined as minimal wasted, space and optimal positioning for expert crews who trained extensively. American tank interiors were designed for efficiency defined as maximizing operator effectiveness for adequately trained crews who might be learning on the job. Different philosophies, different assumptions about training time available, different expectations about crew quality variations. American design assumed you'd have soldiers of varying capability and the equipment needed to work for all of them. German design assumed you'd train soldiers to equipment standards rather than designing equipment to soldier standards. But the fire control installation commanded Hoffman's complete attention, and he leaned forward to examine details that his binocular observation from the bunker couldn't resolve. A level of integration he'd never seen in German armor despite Germany's claimed technical superiority. Everything connected, everything purposeful, no apparent afterthoughts or field modifications. This system had been designed as an integrated whole rather than assembled from separate components that happened to share the same tank. Hayes indicated the gunner's primary sight with a gesture that suggested pride in equipment that had served him well through months of combat. M71D telescopic sight with reticle pattern graduated specifically for the 76mm gun ballistics. 6-power magnification. The periscope provides additional viewing capability when the main sight isn't optimal for the tactical situation. Standard equipment description so far, nothing particularly revolutionary. German optics were superior in maximum magnification, achieving 8-power or even 10-power in specialized applications, and certainly superior in optical clarity. Zeiss glass was legendary for good reason, but then Hayes pointed to a grey metal box mounted beside the gun cradle, a component that Hoffman had noticed earlier but hadn't understood the significance of, and the American lieutenant's next words would begin dismantling 11 years of German gunnery doctrine, Westinghouse stabilizer system. Gyroscopic control for vertical gun elevation. Maintains gun position independent of hull movement. The words initially meant nothing to Hoffman's comprehension, just technical terminology describing some kind of mechanical system whose purpose wasn't immediately obvious from the description. Then their implications began crystallizing in his mind with uncomfortable clarity as engineering principles connected to tactical possibilities he'd never considered. Stabilizer. Gun elevation maintained independent of hull movement, which meant the gun could stay aimed at a target even when the tank was moving, which meant American tanks could shoot while moving, which meant everything German gunnery doctrine assumed about engagement sequences was wrong. Stabilizer, Hoffman repeated slowly, his engineer's mind racing through mechanical possibilities and tactical implications, simultaneously, trying to understand what American designers had accomplished and why German designers hadn't even attempted it. The gun maintains elevation independently of hull movement, while the tank is moving? The question emerged with more incredulity than Hoffman had intended to reveal, but the concept contradicted fundamental assumptions so completely that professional composure cracked slightly. Hayes's slight smile carried the weight of tactical advantage being revealed, not smugness exactly, but recognition that German officers were about to understand why American tanks were winning engagements that German technical superiority should have prevented. Yes, sir. The gyroscope, spinning at 14,000 revolutions per minute, detects any change in gun elevation caused by tank movement over terrain and sends correction signals through a hydraulic system. Keeps the gun on target even when the tank is moving over rough terrain at combat speeds. Not perfect accuracy, but adequate for combat ranges. Not perfect accuracy, but adequate. The phrasing was quintessentially American. Good enough rather than perfect. Adequate rather than optimal. Democratic adequacy defeating aristocratic perfection through practical utility. The philosophical challenge was as profound as the technical one. If good enough delivered faster than perfect, then perfection was tactically inferior to adequacy. Everything German military culture valued was potentially wrong. Weber exchanged glances with Hoffman and Richter, and Hoffman saw his own dawning comprehension reflected in their expressions. German tanks had no equivalent system whatsoever, not even experimental prototypes, not even theoretical proposals. The concept simply didn't exist in German military thinking, because German gunnery doctrine assumed tanks would move to firing positions using tactical mobility, halt completely to eliminate movement variables, acquire targets with superior optics, and fire from stable platforms that maximized accuracy. The idea of maintaining gun elevation during movement represented a fundamental philosophical difference in combat design that questioned every assumption about how tanks should fight. Shooting while moving. It contradicted everything German gunnery theory had taught for 2 decades. Every manual Hoffman had written emphasized achieving stationary stability before firing. Every training exercise stressed the importance of complete halt to maximize first shot accuracy. Every tactical discussion assumed engagement from static positions. The entire architecture of German armored warfare assumed that tanks had to stop before they could shoot effectively. And apparently the Americans had simply decided that assumption was wrong and built equipment that eliminated it. "May we conduct a functionality demonstration?" Hoffman asked, his scientific curiosity overwhelming diplomatic protocol, his engineer's mind demanding empirical evidence to confirm what Hayes was describing. Because if American tanks really could shoot accurately while moving, then German tactical doctrine was fundamentally flawed at the most basic level, and every panzer crew was fighting with an inherent disadvantage that had nothing to do with armor, thickness, or gun caliber, or optical magnification. Hayes shrugged with studied indifference that didn't quite mask his awareness that he was revealing capabilities. German forces hadn't fully understood, despite facing Shermans for 3 years. "Your tank now, sir. But I'll need to explain the system operation to prevent damage from improper use. The stabilizer is reliable if used correctly, but it can be damaged if engaged without proper procedures." For the next 40 minutes, Hayes methodically explained the stabilizer system's operation, while Hoffman took notes with the precision of someone documenting evidence that challenged every professional assumption he'd built a career on. The explanations were technical, detailed. The Westinghouse gyroscope spun at 14,000 revolutions per minute when fully powered, creating a stable reference platform immune to external motion through the same principles that allowed gyroscopic compasses to maintain orientation regardless of platform movement. Hydraulic servos responded to gyroscopic signals in milliseconds rather than seconds, adjusting gun elevation through powered hydraulic actuators to compensate for hull pitch faster than any human gunner could possibly respond manually. The system maintained gun position within 1/8 of a degree, while the tank moved at speeds up to 15 miles per hour across moderately rough terrain, which translated to approximately 2 milliradians of angular accuracy. For comparison, German gunnery doctrine assumed that first-shot accuracy required approximately 1 milliradian precision, so the American system provided half the precision of optimal German accuracy. But it provided that half precision while moving at 15 miles per hour, while German tanks required complete halt to achieve their theoretical full precision. The tactical trade-off was obvious. Half accuracy delivered 7 seconds faster was better than full accuracy delivered eventually. Hayes activated the stabilizer system, and Hoffman immediately noted the smooth hum of the gyroscope spinning up to operational speed, a characteristic sound that American tankers probably heard every day but German soldiers had never encountered because German tanks simply didn't have equivalent systems. The gyro took approximately 30 seconds to reach full operational speed from cold start, spinning up through its entire RPM range, while the hydraulic system pressurized to operating pressure of approximately 300 pounds per square inch. Once operational, the system drew minimal electrical power to maintain gyroscopic speed and respond to correction signals. When Weber's test crew manually rocked the tank hull to simulate terrain-induced pitch, the main gun remained eerily motionless in space relative to the ground, like a compass needle pointing true north, regardless of how you rotated the ship around it. The gun's elevation angle didn't change, even though the hull pitched violently through 10 degrees of motion. The stabilizer servos automatically compensated, adjusting the gun's position relative to the hull to maintain constant position relative to the ground. The effect was uncanny, almost supernatural, mechanical precision that seemed to defy physics, even though it was perfectly explicable through gyroscopic principles and hydraulic servo control. Hayes explained with careful neutrality that avoided discussing specific tactical procedures while still providing useful technical context. The stabilizer allows the tank commander to keep the gun roughly oriented toward target sectors while moving between firing positions. When we spot an enemy tank, the gun is already aimed in approximately the correct direction. We execute a short halt, make final aim adjustments using the manual controls, and fire. German tanks have to spot the target, traverse to it from whatever direction they happen to be pointing, make elevation adjustments while the gun is moving, wait for the traverse to stop completely, then fire. We save 4 to 7 seconds per engagement on average. 4 to 7 seconds per engagement. Hoffman felt blood literally drain from his face, a physiological response to stress that he couldn't control, as tactical implications cascaded through his analytical mind, like dominoes falling in sequence. In tank combat, where ranges were typically 600 to 800 meters and engagement times were measured in seconds, whoever fired first usually won. That was the oldest rule of armored warfare, confirmed by every combat analysis ever conducted. First shot, first kill. The side that fired first achieved approximately 80% kill probability before the enemy could return fire. If American crews could maintain gun orientation during movement toward firing positions, they eliminated the target acquisition time that German doctrine assumed was unavoidable. German tanks had to complete traverse before firing. American tanks completed traverse during movement. The difference was 4 to 7 seconds per engagement, which translated directly to life or death for tank crews. 7 seconds was enough time for the enemy to fire, for the shell to cross 600 meters, for German tankers to die before they could shoot back. The mathematics were inexorable. First shot advantage determined engagement outcomes. Engagement sequence speed determined first shot advantage. Stabilizer systems determined engagement sequence speed. Therefore, stabilizer systems determined engagement outcomes more decisively than armor, thickness, or gun caliber or optical magnification. All of German technical superiority meant nothing if the Americans shot first consistently. Weber voiced the question that hung between them like smoke from a burning panzer, the question that every German tank commander had been asking through 3 years of combat reports that didn't match doctrinal predictions. How many American tanks carry this equipment? Is this specialized equipment for elite units or standard production equipment? Hayes's expression remained carefully neutral, but his answer carried implications that extended far beyond individual tank capability, implications that reached into industrial philosophy and production capacity and strategic reality. Every Sherman built since November 1941, sir. Every single one, including the older 75mm variants, as well as the newer 76mm models. The system is standard factory equipment from Detroit Arsenal, Chrysler, and Fisher body plants. Approximately 30,000 tanks currently in service have stabilizer systems, All American tank crews train on stabilizer use as part of basic gunnery qualification. 30,000 tanks. The number hit Hoffman like physical impact. 30,000 American tanks equipped with technology that allowed engagement while moving. 30,000 Sherman crews trained to exploit mobility rather than static accuracy. Approximately 30,000 American tank commanders who could keep guns oriented toward threat sectors during movement, who could engage 4 to 7 seconds faster than German doctrine allowed, who fought every engagement with systematic advantages German tactics couldn't counter. The mathematics were inexorable and damning. German monthly tank production was approximately 1,200 vehicles across all types when production lines were running at maximum capacity, which they increasingly weren't, as Allied bombing destroyed factories faster than German industry could repair them. American monthly production was approximately 2,000 Shermans plus additional light tanks and tank destroyers. The production differential was bad enough, but if every American tank had capabilities that no German tank possessed, then the quality gap favored Americans despite German insistence on technical superiority. Individual panzer excellence could not overcome systematic disadvantage when that disadvantage appeared in every single engagement across every battlefield where German and American tanks met. Superior armor thickness didn't matter if you were dead before you could shoot. Superior gun caliber didn't matter if the enemy fired first. Superior optical precision didn't matter if engagement speed determined outcomes rather than aiming accuracy. As the morning test session concluded with Hayes shutting down the stabilizer system and the gyroscope spinning down through its operational range back to rest, Hoffman found himself staring at an ordinary-looking grey metal box mounted beside the gun cradle, a box that had carved-in pacelent, revealed the extraordinary scope of German tactical blindness. That box, containing a gyroscope and some hydraulic servos and electrical controls, represented capabilities that German doctrine had never imagined and German industry had never attempted to produce. Superior optical magnification and tighter manufacturing tolerances meant nothing if the enemy could engage while moving, and German crews had to halt before firing. Individual panzer crew excellence could not overcome systematic disadvantage when that disadvantage appeared in every engagement. 30,000 American tanks fighting with 4 to 7 second engagement advantages. 30,000 German targets shooting back too late. The mathematics explained casualty rates that doctrine couldn't justify. If you're enjoying this deep dive into the story, hit the subscribe button and let us know in the comments from where in the world you are watching from today. Sleep had eluded Hoffman completely through the long Brandenburg night following that first day of testing. Each time he closed his eyes in his quarters at the testing facility, technical specifications swirled through his consciousness like mathematical equations that refused to balance no matter how he manipulated the variables. Gyroscopic stabilization versus stationary firing doctrine. 15 miles per hour engagement capability versus halt-to-fire procedures. 1/8 degree accuracy versus 6 seconds of target acquisition delay, 4 to 7 seconds faster engagement versus superior optical precision. The trade-offs didn't favor German doctrine the way Hoffman had spent 11 years insisting they did. Half the accuracy delivered 7 seconds faster was better than perfect accuracy delivered after the enemy had already shot and killed you. Good enough delivered immediately defeated perfect delivered eventually. American adequacy was tactically superior to German perfectionism when tactics valued speed over precision. By dawn, he'd filled 8 pages of his leather-bound notebook with calculations that painted an increasingly disturbing picture of German gunnery disadvantage, mathematical proof that doctrine was flawed at fundamental levels. The morning's systematic testing would either confirm or refute his midnight calculations, and Hoffman felt his professional reputation hanging on results he already suspected would destroy assumptions he'd defended for years. The morning's systematic testing began with clinical precision at 0700 hours under grey skies that threatened snow but hadn't yet delivered. Hoffman had arranged for 3 experienced panzer commanders to participate in comparative gunnery trials that would measure engagement speed using both German doctrine and American stabilization techniques. Each commander would engage identical stationary targets using standard Wehrmacht procedures, then repeat the engagement using stabilizer-enabled American procedures. The comparison would reveal whether Hoffman's midnight calculations matched empirical reality. Hauptmann Friedrich Bauer, a veteran Tiger commander who'd fought in Normandy, would execute the German doctrine demonstration. Bauer was 36, stocky and competent, with enough combat experience to represent typical German gunnery proficiency without being exceptional enough to skew results. Weber would coordinate observations from various positions across Kummersdorf's expansive proving ground, measuring engagement times and accuracy from multiple perspectives to eliminate measurement bias. Hayes observed with studied indifference from his supervised position beside the testing facility, occasionally offering technical clarifications when directly questioned about proper stabilizer operation procedures, but volunteering nothing that approached tactical intelligence beyond mechanical operation descriptions. His role was technical consultant rather than tactical advisor, boundaries that everyone understood. German firing procedure first. Hoffman announced in German to the assembled observers, his voice carrying across the frozen testing ground with practiced projection developed through years of instructing large groups of trainees. Standard Wehrmacht gunnery doctrine executed from stationary position. Hauptmann Bauer will demonstrate textbook engagement sequence following procedures taught at every panzer school in the Reich. Observe and document elapsed time from target identification to round impact. The demonstration proceeded exactly as Hoffman's training predicted, exactly as doctrine prescribed, exactly as he'd taught hundreds of gunners over 11 years of instruction. Target identification at 800 meters using binoculars, the kind of target identification that assumed observer had time to search methodically for threats. Call target location to gunner using clock position and range. Traverse turret using power traverse system that rotated the turret at 6 degrees per second, requiring 15 seconds to traverse 90 degrees from neutral position to target bearing. Center target in optical reticle using gunner's precision adjustment controls. Adjust for range using optical rangefinder mounted adjacent to main gun, measuring distance through triangulation and adjusting elevation accordingly. 5 seconds of range calculation and elevation adjustment. Final aim refinement using gunner's handwheel for precise elevation control. 3 seconds of final positioning. Fire command from commander when everything was perfect. The shell left the gun 23 seconds after initial target identification, and impact struck 2 meters left of target center. Acceptable accuracy by German training standards, well within the tolerances that doctrine considered adequate for first shot kill probability against tank-sized targets at that range. The 2-meter deviation represented approximately 2.5 milliradians of angular error, which was actually better than training standards required. Bauer was a good gunner executing procedures correctly. This was German gunnery doctrine working exactly as designed. But 23 seconds was an eternity in tank combat. 23 seconds was enough time for an enemy tank to complete 3 complete engagement cycles if they were fast. 23 seconds was enough time to die 3 times over if the enemy shot first. Now, demonstrate American technique, Hoffman requested in English, his tone betraying nothing of his growing apprehension about what the demonstration would prove, what uncomfortable truths would become undeniable through empirical measurement. Hayes climbed into the Sherman's driver position with professional competence despite his prisoner status, starting the Ford GAA engine that powered American tanks with reliable adequacy rather than sophisticated excellence. The 500 horsepower Veight gasoline engine caught on the first attempt, settling into a smooth idle that suggested maintenance quality exceeding what Hayes might receive as a prisoner. The key principle, Hayes explained while settling into the gunner's position to demonstrate proper technique, is keeping the gun oriented toward the likely threat sector continuously while moving toward or between firing positions. The stabilizer does most of the work automatically. The gunner just maintains general aim direction using the traverse control and lets the stabilizer compensate for hull motion. When a target is identified, the gun is already pointing approximately at it. The Sherman rolled forward at 10 miles per hour, a conservative speed well below the maximum 15 miles per hour at which the stabilizer remained effective, the hull pitching noticeably over frozen ruts that tested the suspension. Hayes kept his eye to the gunner's sight, making minor corrections with the elevation wheel, while the stabilizer compensated automatically for hull movement. The gun barrel moved with unsettling mechanical steadiness, remaining level relative to the ground even as the hull pitched through 5 degrees of angular change with each terrain irregularity, independent of the tank's violent motion, in ways that seemed to defy physics, even though the mechanical explanation was completely understood. Target, 800 meters, stationary, Hoffman called out in English, his stopwatch already running to measure the engagement sequence that would determine whether his midnight calculations were correct or whether he'd been catastrophizing about threats that didn't match reality. Hayes's response was immediate, trained reflexes executing procedures he'd performed hundreds of times under conditions far more stressful than this controlled test. Minor traverse adjustment using the powered turret drive. 2 seconds to center target approximately in the sight picture. The gun stayed on target throughout the traverse because the stabilizer maintained elevation, independently, eliminating the need to reacquire elevation after traverse completion. Engine throttle closed. Tank rolling to halt. On, Hayes called out, confirming target acquisition. Fire. The total elapsed time from target call to shot was 7 seconds. 7 seconds compared to 23 seconds for German doctrine. The impact struck within 1 meter of target center, which represented approximately 1¼ milliradians of angular error, only half the error of the German technique, despite taking less than 1/3 the time to execute. Weber's voice crackled through the radio headset with barely concealed shock that professional composure couldn't completely suppress. The gun never wavered during traverse. Even while moving before halt, it maintained elevation orientation. The stabilizer kept the gun on target throughout the entire engagement sequence. The German procedure required elevation reacquisition after traverse. The American procedure eliminated that step. Hoffman felt his professional confidence systematically crumbling as the scope of American tactical advantage became mathematically undeniable rather than theoretically possible. German gunners trained for years to achieve first-shot accuracy from stationary positions, investing enormous training time in developing precision skills that transformed adequate marksmen into expert gunners. American gunners achieved comparable accuracy while moving because their equipment eliminated variables that German crews had to master through individual skill. Automation defeated expertise through systematic capability. The difference was 16 seconds of engagement time. 16 seconds represented the margin between living and dying when enemy tanks could shoot back. 16 seconds was enough time for the enemy to identify your position, traverse to you, aim, and fire while you were still completing target acquisition procedures. First shot usually determined engagement outcomes. Seconds meant the Americans shot first in every engagement, unless tactical circumstances prevented them from exploiting their systematic advantage. Demonstrate engagement while moving, Hoffman requested with quiet resignation, dreading the confirmation of suspicions he'd formed during the night, but needing empirical proof that doctrine was as flawed as midnight mathematics suggested. Hayes brought the Sherman back up to 15 miles per hour across deliberately rough terrain that Hoffman had selected specifically to test stabilizer capability under realistic battlefield conditions. The hull pitched and rolled with each frozen rut in ways that would make accurate fire impossible for any German gunner following conventional techniques. But the main gun moved with mechanical precision that seemed impossible, automatically adjusting elevation to maintain point of aim, while the turret traversed smoothly through powered controls. Fire when ready, Hoffman instructed in English, his stopwatch running again to document capabilities that would need to be reported to higher headquarters, even though he knew his report would be filed and ignored because institutional inertia was too powerful to change doctrine based on uncomfortable evidence. Hayes waited for the hull pitch cycle to reach its midpoint, timing the shot to coincide with the moment when vertical motion was minimum, even though the stabilizer was compensating automatically. The shell left the gun while the tank was still moving at approximately 12 miles per hour based on speedometer readings Hoffman had taken just before the shot. The recoil rocked the tank violently, momentarily overcoming the suspension's ability to absorb the impulse, but the shell struck within 1 meter of the target at 600 meters. Not a perfect killing shot necessarily, not the kind of precision that German training standards would consider acceptable, but close enough to achieve mission kill on an enemy tank through mobility damage if not crew casualties. More importantly, dramatically more importantly from tactical perspective, the shot came while moving at speed across terrain that would make German gunnery impossible by any doctrinal standard. How often do American crews actually fire while moving during combat engagements? Hoffman asked, his voice tight with professional concern about capabilities he was documenting, trying to understand whether this was theoretical capability or practical doctrine. Hayes considered his answer carefully, visibly balancing honesty against operational security requirements, deciding how much he could reveal without compromising tactical procedures that might kill American soldiers if Germans understood them. Official training doctrine emphasizes fire from short halts, sir, Hayes replied after that careful consideration, framing his answer to describe doctrine rather than specific unit practices. The stabilizer keeps the gun on target while moving to firing position. Standard procedure is to stop, refine aim using manual controls for maximum precision, fire, then move again immediately to avoid counter-battery fire. But in emergency situations, when immediate response is required, we can fire while moving if necessary. The hit probability drops to maybe 40% at combat ranges, compared to 70% from short halts, but 40% is infinitely better than 0% when the alternative is getting hit first without shooting back. 40% hit probability while moving. German tanks couldn't fire accurately while moving at all under any circumstances. 0% hit probability during movement. The tactical implications were devastating and comprehensive. American tanks could engage during movement to firing positions, during withdrawal from firing positions, during any tactical movement where threat appeared unexpectedly. German tanks had to reach positions first, stop completely with zero forward motion, then acquire and engage targets through methodical procedures that required 23 seconds on average. The Americans eliminated one complete step in the engagement sequence and compressed another step through stabilizer automation. The accumulated time savings was 16 seconds per engagement. Life or death, victory or defeat. Measured in seconds. Weber rejoined them as Hoffman concluded the movement firing demonstration, walking across the frozen testing ground with the slow gait of someone processing revelations that challenged fundamental assumptions about armored warfare developed through 4 years of combat experience. His expression troubled by discoveries that explained battlefield results he'd observed but couldn't adequately account for using German tactical models. The tactical advantages, Weber said quietly in German, knowing that Hayes wouldn't understand but needing to voice conclusions that demanded acknowledgement, may be more significant than superior armor, protection, or more powerful main guns, or better optical magnification. If American tanks can fire while positioning, they compress the engagement timeline in ways German doctrine doesn't address and German equipment doesn't enable. They shoot while we maneuver. They engage while we acquire. They fire while we aim. Every engagement begins with them ahead in the decision cycle. Hoffman nodded slowly, his gunnery instructor's mind already projecting battlefield scenarios where mobile American tanks engaged stationary German targets before panzer crews could complete target acquisition procedures that doctrine required. Tank combat at 600 to 800 meters. Engagement times measuring 23 seconds for German doctrine, 7 seconds for American procedures. The difference was death. The mathematics were unforgiving and inescapable. 7 seconds of target acquisition delay meant burning panzers when the enemy could fire 16 seconds faster. Richter had joined them during the demonstration, and he studied Hoffman's preliminary calculations with the grim expression of an engineer recognizing systematic defeat rather than tactical setback. The equipment itself is not particularly sophisticated, he observed with the clinical detachment of someone analyzing machinery rather than confronting operational failure. A gyroscope operating at 14,000 revolutions per minute. Hydraulic servos responding to electrical signals through conventional servo control architecture. Standard electrical controls using vacuum tube amplifiers that American industry produces in enormous quantities for civilian applications. The innovation is conceptual rather than technological. American doctrine assumes tanks will fight while moving. German doctrine assumes tanks will fight from prepared positions. Their equipment enables their doctrine. Our equipment constrains ours to tactics that the enemy has systematically countered. The doctrinal difference may ultimately be more decisive than the mechanical advantage, Weber agreed, his strategic thinking connecting tactical observations to operational implications that extended beyond individual engagements. German tactics emphasize occupation of superior positions and engagement from static emplacements that maximize our optical and ballistic advantages. American tactics emphasize mobile engagement and rapid position changes that minimize our advantages while maximizing theirs. Their equipment enables their doctrine perfectly. Our equipment is optimized for doctrine that may no longer match battlefield reality. Hayes observed their growing comprehension with quiet professionalism that suggested recognition that German officers were discovering truths that had been obvious to American tankers for 3 years. Understanding that his tank's technology represented something fundamentally larger than military hardware or technical specifications. American industrial pragmatism had created weapon systems that ordinary soldiers could employ effectively while moving at combat speeds, while German technical excellence had produced equipment that required ideal conditions for optimal performance that battlefields increasingly didn't provide. The difference was determining battlefield outcomes across France and Belgium, and now Germany itself, through accumulated tactical advantages that compounded across thousands of engagements daily. Small advantages in individual engagements accumulated into decisive advantages strategically when multiplied across 30,000 tanks, engaging in hundreds of battles daily. 4 to 7 seconds per engagement, multiplied by 30,000 tanks, multiplied by multiple engagements daily, equaled systematic battlefield dominance that German technical superiority couldn't overcome. As afternoon shadows lengthened across the frozen testing ground, January sun already declining toward western horizon by 1500 hours at these northern latitudes. Hoffman compiled measurements that documented German gunnery disadvantage with scientific precision that would have been professionally rewarding if the conclusions weren't so professionally devastating. The M4A3E8 stabilization system didn't make American tanks invulnerable to German fire. Panther guns could still penetrate Sherman armor at combat ranges. Tiger guns could destroy Shermans at ranges exceeding 1,000 meters. But armor penetration didn't matter if you never got to shoot because the enemy fired first. The stabilizer made American tanks faster in the only metric that ultimately determined engagement outcomes. First shot, first kill. The oldest rule of armored warfare, confirmed by every combat analysis ever conducted, was being systematically exploited by American doctrine enabled by American equipment that German doctrine had never imagined and German equipment couldn't match. The captured Sherman had revealed not just superior technology in the narrow sense of better engineering, but an entirely different philosophical approach to tank combat that transformed mobile platforms into viable firing positions rather than requiring static positions for viable firing. German tactical philosophy had created weapons optimized for static warfare, positional defense, methodical advance through prepared positions. American tactical philosophy had created weapons optimized for mobile warfare, fluid tactical situations, rapid exploitation of fleeting opportunities, The difference was deciding battles across Western Europe in ways that individual panzer crew heroism couldn't overcome, because systematic advantages defeated individual excellence consistently. Ordinary American crews using adequate equipment defeated expert German crews using superior equipment, because American doctrine matched American equipment capabilities, while German doctrine assumed capabilities German equipment didn't possess. Thank you for watching. For more detailed historical breakdowns, check out the other videos on your screen now, and don't forget to subscribe.